And I also acknowledge that we have a Zoom fatigue and everyone is fed up with Zoom, but soon, I guess we're going to be back. So I'm going to just open up and I'm going to introduce myself and the Pride Center, which we are hosting an event from. So my name is Dr. Alyosha Gorshkov. I'm Assistant Director for Women's and Pride Center here at Sleepy Rock University. And we are putting together the first time, the great panel to discuss the religion and sexuality and how the idea came up. So the COVID was a very hard time and hard year for all of us. And we realized we're located in a very interesting space where not much religious groups are represented. And the campus is very diverse and we have students from all walks of life. So beginning from me, I was born in the Soviet as an atheist and there was no other way around. And I will be taught in different ways about religion. But when I moved to the United States 7 years ago and my another identity kicked in, my Jewish, Polish, and German identity. And I began to be involved with the CBST, and Rabbi David here, he used to work for CBST, Congregation Beth Simchat Torah in New York. It's one of the free LGBTIQ+ denominations and congregations in the United States. So the journey is very interesting, and I cannot call myself religious, but I'm spiritual. And we've learned a lot that people here, the one story I will tell you, I was with my kippah, with rainbow kippah. David once gave it to me. I was walking down the aisle here, and one student came up to me and whispered, "I'm Jewish too." And I'm like, what the hell? We are not in Nazi Germany. We are not in some kind of 30s and anti-Semitic era. But I realized that because of predominantly certain population and groups here on campus, we don't get much representation. And now we are working towards to start the dialogue with our administration to organize the Spirituality Center on the campus, which will welcome all people, regardless their religion, regardless their spiritual background, because we have people from Muslim background, we have people from different other Christian denominations, Jewish, pagan cultures, so all other different. And here we are to discuss how religion aligns with sexuality and how religion can be a force for social change, because I believe, for me, it's easier to not be involved with the religion because I was born that way, right? So, and when I started communicating with students on campus, I realized how much they are into religion because they grew up with that. And especially LGBTIQ+ students or female students who grew up with a certain system of beliefs and they could not find the space in their denominations. That's why it's very important for the campus as a socially, culturally, politically diverse body to welcome everyone, not only in terms of being visible like Pride Center, Women's Center, to have that system of support. And COVID has shown us that a lot of LGBTIQ students left behind because they could not come, or even if they went back homes, right? So some of the parents, their relatives are not so welcome. And sometimes they look for answers in their religion groups, right? And I also would like to wrap up this part with some certain quotes I found to kick off the conversation about how social justice is important through the eyes, and all quotes from people who belong to different denominations. The first one, when you talk, you are only repeating something you already know. But if you listen, you might learn something new. Dalai Lama. Fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. RBG. A man who stands for nothing will fall for anything. You can't separate peace from freedom because no one can be at peace unless he has his freedom. Malcolm X. And I would like to turn over the conversation to our great facilitators, Kendra and Aya. So they will pick up from here.
Aya, if you want to introduce yourself first, go right ahead.
My name is Aya Lippold. I use she, her, and they, them pronouns. I am a senior history student here at Slippery Rock with a minor in gender studies. I work with the Pride and Women's Center, most especially on trans issues and religious and spiritual stuff as well. Has been something I've been talking with the Pride and Women's Center about. I think that's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Aya. All right. First, I want to thank everyone for being here today. My name is Kendra Claypool. I am the graduate assistant currently for both the Women's and the Pride Centers. So just to like preface the event, I'm going to start by reading the bios of all the panelists. And for all the panelists, if you want to jump in and add anything to your bio, please do. Don't hesitate to just jump right in. And then we're going to start reading the questions, and then the panelists can just go ahead, answer it however they want. Free discussion throughout, so don't feel like you have to wait for the next person. Feel free. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A for all the audience members that are here. So if you want to utilize the chat, put your questions in there just so you don't forget them later on, and they will all get asked later at the end of the discussion. So yeah, I'm going to start. So first off, we have Dr. Colleen Cook, who is a professor of recreational therapy at Slippery Rock University, where she has taught for over 20 years. Throughout her time at SRU, Dr. Cook has been involved in diversity work. She was co-founder of the President's Commission on LGBT Issues, now GISO, founder of the President's Commission on Disability Issues, and a member of the Women's Commission. She is a frequently engaged speaker addressing issues such as addiction, social justice, diversity, safe zone, and the use of laughter as a therapeutic tool. Dr. Cook has served on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee of the Southwestern PA Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America and is a member at St. Andrew Lutheran Church in Shadyside, Pittsburgh. I'm so sorry. I keep getting people popping in, so I'm just like trying to let them in as I'm reading these. So if that's why I pause, I'm so sorry. Next, we have Reverend Ross Carmichael, who serves as a pastor of St. Andrew Lutheran Church in Pittsburgh, inside of Shadyside, following 9 years in congregational ministry in Chicago. He is a graduate of the Lutheran Theological Seminary of Gettysburg, now United Lutheran Seminary, with a concentration in theology and public life. Pastor Carmichael is active with the local chapter of Reconciling Works Lutherans for full participation and is currently chair of the Southwestern Pennsylvania Synod's Immigration Working Group. Okay, next up we have Rabbi David Dunn Bauer. You guys are also welcome to like wave and everything so we know where we're going. Serves as the Jewish Chaplain for SCI-Phoenix, a maximum security penitentiary, sorry, my vocabulary is off obviously, north of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Rabbi Bauer is an alumnus of Yale College, the Conservative Yeshiva in Jerusalem, Conservative
Yeshiva and the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College.
Awesome, thank you. And Pacific School of Religion, which was in Berkeley, California, where he was the first Jew to earn the certificate in Sexuality and Religion. He spent 7 years as a congregational rabbi in Amherst, Massachusetts, 4 years as director of social justice programming under the leadership of Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum. Awesome. For Congregation Beth Simchat Torah in NYC, and a year as the acting director of admissions and student life at RRC. David has been an activist for the LGBTQ plus community for many decades and remains one of the few rabbis worldwide who is about his HIV positive status, serving as the rabbinic director and senior editor of Talk to Me About HIV, a CBST program funded by the NYC Department of Health to help teach HIV awareness within the Jewish community. Additionally, Rabbi Bauer is a sex educator and body worker, and his writing on sexual ethics and queer reading of Torah and his original queer liturgy has been published and anthologized widely. Prior to studying for the rabbinate, Rabbi Bauer directed opera and theater in New York, around the USA and Europe and Israel. That is incredible.
And he's so tired. He's so tired.
I'm sure. That's incredible, though. You've done so much. Awesome. Next up, we have Andrew Harrison Cox, who is 31 years old and a graduate from the Milligan University Seminary with a master's in history, theology. He is a blog writer, local activist, community organizer, business owner, and co-host of the Queer Christian Family Values, otherwise known as QCFV podcast. He is married to Shanley Garber and has a beautiful 4-year-old daughter named Macy. I love that name. Oh my goodness. That's one of my favorite names.
We're a fan.
So beautiful. All right, next up we have Alex Burchnell, is 29 years old and is currently attending seminary at Emmaus School of Ministry. Feel free to jump in at any time.
Emmaus, but it works.
With goals to pastor at his local church, Landmark Worship Center. He is a content creator, avid reader, and founder of the Queer Christian Family Values, as well as the podcast co-host. He has been married to his husband, Chris, for 8 years, and they plan to start a family following his schooling. Incredible. Thank you for being here. All right. And then we have the Reverend Patricia Lavery. Since her ordination to the priesthood in the Episcopal Church in July 16th of 2020, so very recent, Mother Patricia has served as the vicar, which is
vicar.
Thank you so much. At the Church of the Epiphany in Grove City, PA. Prior to that, she served as an ordained deacon at both Epiphany and Memorial Church of Our Father in Foxburg, PA. Lavery holds an MSPL from Carlow University, all close, and BS in Communications from Ohio University. Trained through the School for Ministry, she was ordained a deacon in 2010 and served Episcopal Ministry Centers in Greenville, Hermitage, and Newcastle. She has held several positions for the Diocese of Northwestern Pennsylvania and Erie, PA, as convention delegate on the Peace and Justice Task Force, and as a representative to the council. Her ministry centers on awareness, human trafficking, safe church training for clergy and congregations, needs of military families and our diocese, and developing spirituality awareness through centering prayer. The Anglican Rosary and the Labyrinth. Lavery retired in December of 2020 from her position as a federal contractor, and she has 2 daughters and 6 grandchildren. That's incredible. Probably keeps you busy, I'm sure. So these are all our panelists. And like I said, we'll get the questions started. Everyone, please feel free to just jump in whenever, if you have an answer, if you want to talk about, like, go off someone else's point, anything is great. So Aya, do you want me to go off with the first question? All right, great. So first up, there have been a lot of controversies around the religious perspective on sexuality, and particularly the LGBTIQA+. Oftentimes, the religious texts are scrutinized and misinterpreted. What is your perception on religion and sexuality?
And God said it was very good. Start with Genesis. Start with Genesis. What we talk about is we are children of God. We are wonderfully and beautifully made, and we're made in the image of God. So God loves us. That's basically where it comes from. From what I've studied, I mean, out of the over 300 or 32,000 verses in the Bible, there are 6 what they call clobber verses. And I think it's interesting to look at translation. I think problems come in with translation. I don't know if any of you have seen an interlinear Bible, but I can see some heads nodding, so you know what. If you look at the Old Testament text, the Hebrew Scripture text, the New Testament text, we're talking Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and we're translating words that are not translatable. It's hard enough to translate between English and Spanish. So go back, thousands and thousands and thousands of years and translate. That is the problem with religion, is that they've gotten too involved in sexuality. And not all religions, not all denominations, but we can confuse sometimes what are cultural mores and what we are called to believe through our faith in God.
So I was raised in a very conservative church, and I was raised to believe that homosexuality was sin. And I also came to recognize myself as a lesbian. And I believed very early on that God is love and that God taught me to love. And that since God taught me to love, the love that I was experiencing, it had to be good. It had to be, but that's not what my church was teaching me. And so I left that church eventually and ended up elsewhere. Today, I know that I am just what you said, Patricia, a beloved child of God. I know that. I know that, as well as I know that my name is Colleen Cook, and that's been, one of the biggest blessings in my life. And I just have a question for the pastors, the people who know the Bible better than I. Is it true that the word homosexuality did not appear in the Bible until 1945?
Yes.
Okay.
They're working on a movie on that. 1946.
I didn't know it appeared
The
in the
word
Bible at
homosexual
all.
did not exist until the late 1800s.
Yeah.
So it couldn't possibly have. I can't remember what it is.
Where
There's several words, Hebrew words that
Arsenokoitai and yeah.
That's Greek.
That's Greek. Yeah.
Where did they put? Seriously, where is the word homosexuality showing up in a Bible?
It only shows up in I think is it Romans? It's Romans and Timothy or First Corinthians. I can't remember.
Truthfully,
I believe it's Romans.
I've got to look at I can look at the clobber verses, but basically there's prescriptions in Leviticus. There's the story in Genesis of Sodom and Gomorrah. Then there's two passages in Leviticus. There's a passage in Romans, one in First Corinthians and one in First Timothy, and that's that's it. And they're very poorly translated, basically. If you look at the it depends on what Bible that you look at. And the NIV will have homosexuality. The NRSV, the Oxford Bible does not mention homosexuality.
I can't think of a single edition of the Jewish scriptures, the Torah or the Tanakh, that would use the word homosexual in anything but a footnote.
Mm-hmm.
But it wouldn't appear in a translation because it's just not. It's not in. It's not in the Hebrew biblical vocabulary.
Right. So my point. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's a fascinating thing that happens because the amount of hoops you jump through to arrive at homosexuality as an overarching term. I mean, just to run through them real fast. If you look at the Levitical text where it describes, a man not having the lyings with a male the way he would with a woman, there's so much there that does not directly associate with sexual orientation at all. But when you get to the Septuagint, it translated these words into what Paul mushed together to make this term in the New Testament, which we find to be arsenokoitai. And then in the Corinthian text, they actually take malakoi and arsenokoitai, two completely different words doing very different things, and mush them together to make this English word homosexuality. So the amount of liberties, unwarranted liberties that we had to take with the text to create this word that is now insulting everything we now know about sexual orientation is not appropriate to the translation or interpretation process of scripture.
And there are people that have never read anything else but that. So
right.
they're the people that will, if I'm talking with them, but it's in the Bible. Oh, it's like, no, it's not. No, I'm sorry.
We're so sorry someone put that in there.
Really not.
Yeah.
There's I was teaching online last night. I was teaching about Leviticus 18, and one of the things that we looked at was the word toeva, and toeva is what is translated in, I guess, King James first as abomination. So it's the last word of Leviticus 18:20, or second to last word, toevahi. It is an abomination, and talking about a man laying the layings of a woman with another man. But a scholar, Rabbi Seth Goldstein, traced the different uses of the word toeva in chronological order, and it was in Proverbs it meant Proverbs it means an affront to God, like this is a good person wouldn't do it. In Deuteronomy it was something that a good Israelite wouldn't do because it was something that foreign people did. A toeva in Ezekiel was a betrayal of, was turning away from God. So if in Deuteronomy it was turning towards the ways of another nation, Ezekiel is saying no, it's simply turning away from God. And Leviticus kind of attaches the word toeva to all kinds of violations of social constructs. But the idea that people will say, well, no, it's an abomination, it says so in the Bible. Well, if you go back and look at the various places that the word toeva showed up, different biblical writers at different times, they actually were all using the word toeva, but they meant something completely different by it in each context. That's 4 very distinct meanings, but because they all get translated as abomination or defilement, it says people equate those different meanings, but they are different. It's just Bible doesn't speak with one voice, never did.
It's a book of books. I mean, and it was put together because it's easier to carry around than 79 scrolls. So but you also have to take whatever you take. You have to take in context. You can't just read one passage without reading what happened before and what happened after, and how does this all fit in together. It's just, you can't cherry pick and say, aha, I found this scripture and now it's supporting what I believe. The clobber, there's a great book called Unclobber. I don't know if any of you have read that.
Yeah.
But that is, that really gets, it's called by Colby Martin, and he breaks down each one of the clobber verses and puts it in context. I think he's done probably the most masterful job I've read so far in refuting all of them.
I'm continually excited to see, because I'm a huge book nerd, obviously, in my bio, but we've got like God and the Gay Christian, you've got Torn. There's so many books that are coming out now that are addressing clobber passages and just identities, even ones like Austin Hartkey, because I'm trans myself, and seeing all of the identities addressed, but also showing that you can still be Christian and in the queer community. And I personally think that we can exist, because the question was, what is perception on religion and sexuality? And I had written down that I think it's possible to exist harmoniously if we can just get past the holding so stringently to an English interpretation. Somebody said on my TikTok that Jesus spoke English. No, he didn't. So I think that if we can just get past the idea that only our version exists, and I feel like that touches on nationalism a little bit and possible racism vibes to me. If we just stick and hold only to our KJV purist mentality, I think that we can maybe move past the infighting rather than trying to do the work that Jesus did of helping the poor and everything else. So
you have the
my 2 cents.
You have the bumper sticker that says WEWJU. What emoji would Jesus use?
Oh, Lord. Probably the face palm is what it would be.
I wanted to just touch on the word sexuality, because sexuality in my lifetime, and I came out for the first time when I was pretty young in about 1973, and the word sexuality has morphed in the last 40, 50 years. So sexuality, and biblically, when they talk, those verses don't even talk about sexuality. They talk about specific acts. Like the verse in Leviticus is pretty definitely talking about penetrative anal intercourse. Sexuality is what you do. Sexuality is desire. It's what you want to do. Sexuality is orientation, like the trend of, oh, I see, this is not just what I want to do today, but this is like these are how my desires kind of become consistent over time. Sexuality is identity. Like I have a tattoo that that says "so gay," because I had been gay out for 40 years and wanted to give myself a promotion. So I no longer say I'm gay. I say that I'm so gay. But it's part of my identity. And sexuality is community. Like part of it's what bonds me to other gay people, other queer people, and sexuality is also politics. So it's like, religion is multiple things. Sexuality is multiple things all at once. For me, I think I realized that God spoke to me through the experience of my body and through sex. And then I realized that God spoke to me through Judaism. And then I realized that the two of those actually, you could, that they meshed well. That the way God was speaking to me through physical experience and the way God spoke to me through Jewish liturgy and text, same God, same conversation. So,
and I think for me that sexuality is a gift from God, and because I see it that way, I was really, really eager to be married in my church to the person that I've committed my life to. And, and thankfully that happened, but we had been together for a long time before that was even a possibility, even in my church. But I think that my sexuality is a gift, and I didn't always see it that way. I saw it as a curse at one point. Why would anybody want this? So with that, I'll pass.
I think basically when you look at any of these clobber passages, when you look at and you put them in perspective and you drill down and get I'm not real good at speaking Hebrew or Greek or anything else. I rely on other people's, a lot of the work of other people. What is condemned is anything that is based on power, based on anger, based on domination, anything that's hurtful. So obviously, and those are the same kinds of things. Those are the same things we work against today in our religion. We're against human trafficking. We're against child abuse. We're against, we work to do what is right in the world, what is right and healthy and good in the eyes of God, and that's our job.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew. So we did we're
or
obviously
anyone else. I mean, who knows if I know it?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, so we're doing a series on the clobber passage on our podcast, and we had a discussion. There's only a handful of possibilities that these clobber passages could be referencing. There were multiple possible translations for when we did the Leviticus, we did 1 Corinthians, different ones.
Right.
I think we said there's incest was one. There was pederasty, which is the practice of adult men having sexual relations with young prepubescent, mostly boys. There was the temple practice of the idol worshiping, where they would have prepubescent children represent the idol and practice sexuality or sexual conduct as a way of worship. There was, I'm trying to think of what the other one was.
Yeah, there's this complicated. The first thing that should be said about anything about sexuality is how complicated it is.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
How we pretend how we can so easily take text and pretend that it's as little as desire and saying no, or as simple as resisting some urge. But sexuality is the bedrock on which everything about your understanding of the world and how your mind functions, and desire is so imperative on what it means to be a human being. And so when we look at like the trajectory of different Hebrew words, which I'm sure others could speak more effectively on than myself, but when we also look at the Greek, we do find these passages. We find all these passages that talk about all these different things that probably associated most certainly with temple practices in certain situations, because there is, sexual behavior happening within these temples that Paul had opinions on. But beyond all these texts that say, don't do this, and us up here going, well, it doesn't technically say that. There is also this affirmation as early as Genesis about the goodness of the partnership in sexuality. And, even when we criticize Paul a lot, and sometimes justifiably so, we find that when Paul talks about, instead of singleness, why should you get married? One of the first things he talks about is fulfilling sexual desire. That is one of the first things he mentions as a telos for marriage, is the affirmation and fulfillment of sexual desire. And so there is room in these texts that are the cradle for holding up our faith, and for Christians, holding up Christ, that we can so easily see a way forward and a point and a direction of, there is a life for me in this faith, and there is a life for others outside of this faith as well, affirmed in their sexuality and their very being.
That is often my issue I have with non-affirming Christians, is how simple they take homosexuality to be. Sort of like how Rabbi Bauer was talking about, like, it's not just, they don't take a person's like being like holistically. It is simply a thing of divorcing actions from the individual. But being LGBTQ plus isn't just actions. It is a whole complicated mess of things, and it's just so, that is often one of the most frustrating parts about dealing with some Christians, is how simple they make out really complicated stuff to be.
Yeah, ain't that just the problem with education as a whole? When it's something we directly associate with, it's complicated. But whenever we're talking about the other, it's the others, or the others' beliefs, or the others' religion, or the others' culture, is this two-dimensional. Paulo Freire did this wonderful pedagogical education on just what it looks like to be miseducated in others, and how we can make other people, like that race, that culture, that religion, that sexuality, a two-dimensional thing that is far less complicated than myself. But me, oh, it's complicated. Well, why are these straight people getting divorces? Oh, it's complicated. It's complicated. Yeah. We need Bible studies for that. And just like, oh, well, why are they getting remarried? Well, it's complicated. It's complicated. Life's complicated. But for those people over there, well, let me break it down simply for you. Like that, we do that so much, and it's a problem with how we think even about being educated and what it means to understand someone else's experience.
And what's troubling to me is that I think we do that with Christianity too, because I am a Christian. I am a Christian woman who is also a lesbian. And so when people talk about Christians as these horrible gay bashing people, that is not the Christianity that I know. And so, I mean, that is really, really discouraging when that happens for me. And I'm left, I feel like those people gave Christianity a bad name, because that's not Christianity.
I don't want to cut anyone off. I just want to first, I'll let a few more people answer this. And then I wanted to see if Pastor Ross wanted to add to this at all. And then we're going to be moving. We do have 2 more questions that I just want to make sure we touch on.
Thank you. No, I don't have too much to add. It's been a long time since my close study of Greek and Hebrew. But I guess the one thing I would say is that for a faith like Christianity that so heavily affirms embodiment, like Jesus was God made human, the church rejected early on the notion that spirituality and embodiment is separate and one is evil and one is good. So it's just, I think we've done a lot ourselves, a lot of a disservice and a lot of harm to people by the way we have shamed embodiment instead of treating it as Dr. Cook said, as a gift from God that God has declared good.
I want to jump in just as a non-Christian voice here. Even though it's great that if I just hold back, Christianity can take the rap for all of the homophobia and sexuality of history. But I guess I do have to say there are homophobic and sex negative Jews out there too. I'm trying to find a quote from late theologian Marcella Althaus-Reed, who wrote extraordinary stuff about belief and faith and sex. And she really talked about that kind of the experience of the erotic and sexuality was the baseline, that you build from that. And I think this is echoing something that one of you has said, but that it's not that we are somehow we go along in our lives and we deal with questions of faith, whatever, and then we make decisions about sexuality or about our erotic identity. Erotic identity is that gets installed or somehow that becomes integrated into a person's identity early, and everything else in life I think follows on from that. So it really is, it's part of the basic imprint of, if we are created in a divine image, our erotic nature is part of that. And we can look at the creation stories as God responding to God's own loneliness, and God's own desire for company, and why does God need a human being? And that's what I was going to say. I'm going to shut up now.
I'm going to ask the next question. I feel like a lot of these kind of all coincide with the questions we have, but in your opinion, how can religious organizations support its LGBTQIA+ followers? What steps should be taken to accommodate these individuals in short and long-term perspectives?
Well, I'm continually encouraged seeing affirming churches out there. I think that is a huge step in the right direction, giving a space for people to feel safe, and I can hold my husband's hand, at church and not feel like I'm going to get kicked out or something. And I think another aspect would be if a lot of churches, especially mainline Christian churches, want to have small groups. We constantly hear sermons about get in a small group, be a part of fellowship. If you're going to do that, try to have a space for LGBTQ+ people. For instance, my church has a trans ministry, so it's very specific to transgender individuals, and my husband is the director over it. So if you're going to have the space for LGBTQ+ people, make sure that you have them in leadership and let their voices be heard. Because oftentimes I've seen churches that their heart's in the right, but they hetero, most of the time white person in leadership for the minority, and oftentimes the minority voices are not really heard or recognized. So that would be my first step of encouraging, lifting up each other's voices, and even taking part in pushing back against legislation that is going to harm the community. So that's my 2 cents.
My experience at my church has been a little bit different. I'm really grateful that we don't need a separate group for LGBTQ people. We're just one body of Christ, and in that we respect that she is lesbian, she is gay, he is bisexual, he is transgender, she is transgender. It just doesn't. There's no that we are a body. We are a body of believers, and we just respect each other in our sameness and in our difference and in our failures and in our successes. So, and I think I understand what you're saying, Alex, but I also appreciate just being able to be that it doesn't necessarily. I'm just such a part of my congregation, my sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it doesn't matter. Everybody there knows I'm gay. Everybody there knows everything about me, just about. But I'm a member of the congregation more than I'm a lesbian member of the congregation.
I think that it also speaks to where you are in your journey, in your life journey, in your faith journey, because there are some people that don't have that. I'm hesitant to use the word privilege in this aspect, but I do see, like, for instance, I grew up in a very liberal household. My grandmother was friends with drag queens. I didn't grow up with the inherent homophobia, but my husband did. He was forced through conversion therapy, right? And so I think it's important, especially for people that are coming into the congregation or are working through coming out. They may not be in a place where they feel that comfortable, where they feel that connection. And so I personally think that it is good, even if it's just maybe they connect with another individual and they have a group, but it's affirmed through the church. Because we have several trans individuals that are in the process of coming out and they don't know who to talk to, where to go. We live in East Tennessee. It's not exactly the most progressive place. So I think it's regional. That's going to be different based on what kind of groups you need. But I think if people in the congregation, if everybody's in a good place, if everybody, like my congregation, like 90% of them are LGBTQ plus, so we don't really have the necessary need to have a gay specific group, but we are finding we do need the trans specific group because more and more trans people are coming to our church looking for that support. But
do they need a straight group?
You're right. Apparently, I think so. Like a straight anonymous group. I don't know.
I would say
I'm in a very small, tiny congregation, and in Grove City, Pennsylvania. We're just north of Slippery Rock here, but I mean, it's the bastion of Calvinism. So I mean, if you want, we're the lone liberal voice in a very small town, and even then it's difficult because our congregation is you've got the full spectrum of very, very conservative to very, very liberal. The Episcopal denomination in of itself has been very active. And I mean, I think, Colleen, your denomination has gone through a split. We've gone through a split. The Methodists are working through a split. Protestants they constantly split. I mean, as long as there are 10 people in a coffee pot, they can start a new church. So you just have to, from my standpoint in my little church, what I can do is I have to set the example. I have to be the person that is welcoming. And I have to let people know, we don't turn anybody away, and everyone is welcome at the table. That's just the only thing I can do. Now, and the more that you integrate people, I mean, bringing somebody onto the bishops committee, recognizing these people are leadership. These people are they're part of our congregation, and they're going to be part of our leadership. So, I don't
Sure.
want to.
No, go ahead.
Thank you.
I'm just rambling.
Not at all. I think first thing that I would emphasize is that the small gestures matter. The little rainbow flag somewhere matters. Using the vocabulary of LGBTQ, of talking about trans people, practicing how to say these things in a public way where you don't stammer and you don't go. I would like to talk about trans issues, because you have to speak the words and you have to model the confidence. And it's not enough to care, and it's not enough to be passionate. It's sacredly important to be strategic, to think in terms of coalition building, to think in terms of, this is what I want to say, but if I say it right now and I don't have anybody else standing next to me or standing behind me, I will, as a clergy person, probably lose my job, and B, set up this community for a kind of a conservative backlash. So to do the coalition work of finding who are the other rabbis, who are the other clergy in the area who stand with you and are willing to stand with you, so that if it can be clear, if you are a queer clergy person, if you can never be standing alone, it's not, you want to be standing with the pastors and the rabbis and the imams, or the community leaders from other faiths with you, and that's part of the obligation we have as spiritual leaders, is if we're not only to be brave and brash as necessary, but to be strategic and to create safety for people. And we create safety by making a multi-dimensional space. If it's just me, I'm only occupying one spot. But if it's me and Patricia and Andrew and Leosha and Aya, and we're all together, then we define an area of commonality among us, and then so that somebody who wants to come out has a space in which to come in. So we have to think in terms of our organizing techniques and principles. Who's got power? How do we approach the people who have the power? Just because we're right, if we don't have enough power behind us, our being right will get us nowhere.
Fully agree.
I love the segue. So Aya, are you ready for the last question? Yeah. Because I think that was a perfect way to move into the next topic. So go ahead, Aya.
In minds of many people, religion, and especially churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, are obsolete. Do you believe that religion can be a force of social change? In what ways? And what strategies can religious organizations and groups adopt to pursue social justice?
I'll jump in there. That's right. So this is what I do for a living. So I'll just jump in. I'm a community organizer. I work for a justice ministry. It is in my experience and what I am doing that the single most effective social institution for justice and change is the local synagogue, temple, cathedral, mosque, church, because there's already this baked in justice narrative about hearing, if you go to Nehemiah, hearing the stories of those that are suffering, getting angry with them, organizing them together, and in mass confronting the people of power that are causing the wrong. Now it's a complicated story, because we are the image bearers of both the oppressed. It wasn't in my bio, so I'll just say it. I'm a pansexual man in a straight passing relationship. So I've looked straight my whole life, and so when straight Christians don't think I'm in the room, they have a lot of things to say. And I was raised in Tennessee, just like Alex. So heard a lot of things. We are the image bearers of the oppressor and the oppressed, of the people that have been adopted into or embodied these religious movements that have oppressed people, but also are the image bearers of and the relation point to those that have been hurt over time. So you will not find a single social institution, in my opinion, that is more equipped with narratives of justice, narratives of organization, narratives of the need for change than the local religious institution. That is, in my opinion, it's the most effective institution to make social change in the world. Still.
There's a great book by Phyllis Tickle called The Great Emergence. And basically what she says is every 500 years, the church, big church, has a spiritual rummage sale and gets rid of what's not working. So the Roman Empire, fell in the at the end of the 5th century. In the year 1000, the East and West split. In 1500, the Reformation happened, and in 2000, we became very conscious of social justice issues, and that's where churches are right now. Whether it's sacred ground, whether you're talking about the indigenous peoples and the appropriation of land, whether it's the racial issues, Asian issues, those are all going to be hot. Those are all hot button issues. And that's where churches are right now, in the forefront, saying this is, it's gun control. There's a group for just about everything. And I think it's really important to understand that even small churches in small communities can be a voice, can be open to discussions, to making sure these issues are are on the table.
I've heard a phrase. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just put a book link into the chat. So any wisdom I have in any of this is because I basically apprenticed with one of the geniuses of religious social justice work of the 20th and 21st century, Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, who was the senior rabbi of the LGBTQ synagogue in New York, and an activist from day one in her life. But she has a book that just came out. It's so new, I haven't read it yet, called Chaver Up. 49 rabbis explore what it means to be an ally through a Jewish lens. And I think this idea of how do we serve the people who are part of our community and part of our family, but who are not us? How do I serve? How do I serve the pansexual community who are actually who are likely to be invisible and therefore will hear all kinds of stuff that the people who are out as a different brand of queer aren't going to have to hear. So how do I stand with Andrew? How do I stand with Alex? How do I stand with Colleen and with people who aren't me? And it's so important for me as a white person. How do I learn how to stand with people who are undergoing a kind of racial oppression on which my experience of anti-Semitism might give me some perspective, but doesn't give me knowledge or identification. So I want to honor my teacher, and I also wanted to draw people's attention to this resource.
Thank you, because that's where I stand as a heterosexual woman. And I have been the ally for most of my life. Was involved in theater and musicals all my life. So I was always the ally. I was the straight ally. And that's where it's in why it's so important for me to be a safe place, for me to be a safe person, because I've seen too much of it over the course of my life where it wasn't.
I think the coming together of different faith communities is also very helpful. When the Tree of Life shooting occurred in October in 2017, Pittsburgh united, number one, but the church communities, the synagogue communities united, and 2 days later had an interfaith gathering in Squirrel Hill that was just, you know, and out of that was born Squirrel Hill against gun violence. I know that our church and a number of other churches participate in Pride, so being visible that way, I think, is also helpful. But working together with, you know, as an interfaith community, I think would be a really, really good opportunity.
Right. And you need to have component communities of faith for it to be interfaith. Otherwise, it's just kind of what it can be mush. CBST built over the years of the the Trump presidency and a close allegiance with a New York City mosque. The Friday after Trump was elected, I was working for CBST, and I got a phone call in the morning from Rabbi Kleinbaum saying, "Don't you think it would be a good idea for us to go down to the mosque with signs saying Jews support our Muslim neighbors, and to hand out roses?" And I was like, sure, I think it would be a good idea. I mean, like, it would never have dawned on me, but yeah. And we went down there, and people, as the Muslim community was coming together for Jummah prayers on Friday, in November, they got the message and started to cry with relief before they were close enough to read the signs. They somehow knew what we were doing there. And we were there, CBST was there every Friday, rain, heat, sleet, snow, whatever, from the week that Trump was elected until the pandemic shut down. Every Friday we were there. And then we would have members of the Islamic community who would come and visit the synagogue, which, just as people may or may not know, doesn't happen. It doesn't happen that, that the kind of cross-pollination of interest. So the fact that we were an LGBTQ synagogue, and it gave us stature. The fact that, frankly, that we owned a building, we didn't for most of our history, but that we were a presence. It meant that when we did something, we made a gesture, it was seen and it was felt. So, as we grew up and we got presence and power, we could use that to help protect and to empower others. So I do believe in houses of worship. I do believe in communities that get together. And I also believe in queer synagogues, churches, mosques, etc., because there's a kind of the critical mass. When when I'm together with other queer Jews, and when I'm together with other gay Jewish men, there's a kind of a synergy like that. It just starts to bubble and pop. And so it much as I'm thrilled to be in an interfaith context, and I thrive in that, it's also I need to be among my people as well in order to blossom.
So sorry, I don't want to cut you off. I'm just gonna jump in really quickly because we're gonna start just wrapping this up, because I do want to make sure I have time for questions of the audience. But I saw first that Pastor Ross, you were unmuted. Is there something that you wanted to say? Because I saw you were unmuted.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I would just add that I think it was Rabbi Bauer, who just said this, in order to have a critical mass, we need component parts. And I think one of the things that we've struggled with in mainline Christianity is we haven't motivated our people very well to recognize that social justice is part of our faith tradition. You know, when baptism became part of citizenship in the Roman Empire and Christendom happened, baptism just became this thing you did. And one of the things that I think has been helpful is we're recovering our baptismal theology and understanding that one of the components of that is a commitment to living day to day, to strive for justice and peace in the world. And the other thing I'd add is the other trouble is that we've often talked about salvation as an individual spiritual thing, when salvation biblically was quite often communal, most often communal. And it was not about some far off heaven, but it was about God's reign, God's values breaking into this world here and now. Salvation was not just about reaching, God in the sky, but it was about, when Jesus brought salvation, it was about healing. It was about restoring people to community. I'd add the prophets, preaching for social justice when people were being taken advantage of economically, all those sort of things. Salvation is here and it's now, and it's part of our heritage to work for social justice according to God's vision.
Thank you so much. Anyone else want to add? If there's any questions, please feel free to either unmute yourself, put it in the chat. Our panel is still here, so feel free to ask anything you may have, or anything you wanted to add the rest of for the panel.
Yes, people get shy, and it's a huge topic and a lot of information, and it's so amazing. I've been listening to that because it's very important for us to recognize, and that all of you said that we have to be aware of existence of others and existence of sometimes that what I've seen, and do not get me wrong, with the Russian Orthodoxy, it's a terrorist politics what Russian Orthodox Church does with people, how they push the agenda of genocide of queer people in Chechnya, how they pushed, because for me, I was baptized without my knowledge. It was 1990 Soviet Union. It was for me like a festivity, a drag queen show, not the real religion. And that's what we are not teaching people, and we enforce them to read the particular passages about Sodom and Gomorrah, and Russian people have no idea that Sodom and Gomorrah is something quite different. So they're what I'm trying to make the point, right? So that religion is used in the particular countries, and even in some like ISIS-related countries, religion is overused to penalize, to criminalize, and to justify that. And we're still seeing it here, and in the context of the Equality Act, right? In the context of North Dakota, South Dakota, all of those anti-trans bills, which supported by religious communities, I guess, very important to us. And we are like here now doing that social justice, right? As we're here together, and that's most important. So do we have any question?
I have a question. Yeah. Thank you very much, panel. Really glad to hear you say this. So I belong to a Presbyterian church in East Liberty, which is very inclusive and progressive. But I have in-laws who are very much on the other side. Their largest effort to be accepting. One person said to me, I always say, hate the sin, not the sinner. And I say, why are we talking about sin? Like, where did that come from? So my question is, how do we reach out to those people, to those religious right who just steadfastly say, this is what the Bible says? We can counter that with all the arguments you've made, but I guess my feeling is, how do we reach out to those people as part of God's children and try to reach out and say, what can go deeper? What are you really afraid of? Is there something about this whole thing about people that don't look like you that makes you uncomfortable because they don't look like you? Is there anything we can do to share something with those people who are steadfastly, anti-gay, anti-LGBT in a loving way to bring them on? Because my feeling is when we become sort of militant and say, well, you're a sexist, you're a racist, you're whatever, they just dig their heels in the sand and they go further and further away. And it's not making us a less polarized society.
I like how Andrew responds. So he's blown up on TikTok, and oftentimes I see he gets some really, really hard questions. And I really appreciate how he responds in such compassion to other people, and makes them feel as though they're being heard, and also makes them think. So I'm not, unfortunately, capable of that at that point. I feel like for me, I want to immediately go into, well, let's look at what the translation says. But as so my church is rather conservative in its reading of the Bible. It is affirming. So sometimes I do get people holding a certain standard to the Holy Bible, which I do as well. But when you start asking people to start looking at translations, they say, oh, well, you're a Satanist, you're a false teacher, false prophet, and they start using these terminologies that they've always used to kind of put up that wall. So I don't really know how to get past that, other than to say, you know what, we can agree to disagree, and my content isn't necessarily for you. I'm here to raise up people who otherwise would feel ostracized from the church. But I don't have a good answer for that, because I battle with my in-laws constantly, who they're very, very unaffirming. And it's a hard question, and I don't know if there's like an easy answer for that.
No, nothing's easy, but and an approach that I learned from Rabbi J. Michelson, whom I also just referenced a book in the chat, is find the verses. I mean, find the verses that you and they respect. You know, so there's
Common ground, yeah.
There's and if it's all scripture, then don't just encourage them not to just take the one verse that is causing them trouble, but let's talk about all the verses that that move us and inspire us both, and to remember that for all of us, there's some verse in scripture that we respect, and we know it's true, and we know that we aren't the best examples of it. So the humility of this is sacred teaching, and we all should be humble before it, in that way can help. But also sometimes people aren't reachable, and that's sad. And
sometimes they're ready, sometimes they're not, sometimes they never will be, and you understand and love them anyway. Find what's the common ground. What do you believe and I believe, where we can reach. And this is how I have to operate in our local ministerium. And it's it's like, yeah, I'm the I'm Episcopalian, I'm the liberal, but what do we believe? Where do we start? And as Christian churches, do you believe in God? Yep, I believe in God. And if that's all that we can agree on, at least we can take baby steps from there. Mm-hmm. It's not an easy journey, but it's a journey that God walks with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We have one more question from Bailey. What are specific ways in which your church religion acts against the violence against diversity groups, in terms of action versus words, especially when violent incidences occur and are heard across the country? I think this is a great question to kind of start wrapping up. So please, anyone feel free to jump in.
Colleen referenced the Tree of Life shootings, and after that horrific assault on Jewish community, faith groups created arm in arm, walls of safety around synagogues at services. I think this, I first saw this when Westboro Baptist Church would be going around invading people's invading funerals, people's most vulnerable and grief-stricken moments, that faith groups would stand just as a barricade and say, sorry, if you want to get to them, you go through me, you go through us. So it is, again, I learned this from Rabbi Kleinbaum, it is about putting your body on the line sometimes. But some people, if you are the minority group or the diversity group that's being assaulted, your body's already on the line. As a Jew, as a queer person, as a gay man, my body's on the line. So at that point, I'm actually ready to go put it on the line to protect and to stand up for the Muslim community, to stand up for progressive Christian communities that are, stand up for Black and the Asian communities. So.
Thank you so much. Go ahead.
So I used to be the education pastor for a fairly middle of the lane conservative, mostly white, upper middle class church in Tennessee. It was where they invited me in to work. I worked there for about 6.5 years, being who I am. It was very interesting. And watching this church with, lily white pastors and staff handle the race issues that happened throughout the Trump administration, or really that didn't start there, but just were exacerbated in such a way that we couldn't unsee it. Those that had not seen it up until now just could not unsee it. The hardest conversations we had behind closed doors were acknowledging the reality of where we were as a congregation historically and how far we could take people before we lost them. And that is something that is hard for people that are disconnected from a particular faith community or from leadership in a faith community to wrestle with, because you want them to arrive. We do too. We want them to arrive. We always want them to arrive, but you can't always tell people the final destination. Sometimes you have to tell them the next 2 or 3 steps just to get them walking with you, because they're not ready to hear, maybe you've digested white supremacist ideologies over time, or certainly have, and because of the country you live in, or you've ingested ideas of racial violence. So the hard part is, for us, what it meant was every time something bad happened in the country, we preached on it. We canceled a whole lot of sermons to talk about racism. We talked about racism more than any topic that year. And that was the step forward that made us lose congregants because they didn't want to hear about it, but wake up other congregants to the reality that just because it's not sitting in, the problem is not in the pew beside you, doesn't mean it's not in your city.
Yeah, about 5 years ago, I had some struggles with that as we in Pittsburgh tried to get a new sanctuary movement going. We had talked with some people in Philadelphia who had a very active and very helpful movement. They would do things like, and it wasn't just churches, but, people who would, different constituents would get together. They had an emergency team where if they heard that an ICE raid was going to happen at someone's home, they would gather a bunch of people and start a worship service around the home in order to protect. And, because at that time, religious gatherings were still considered sensitive and ICE was directed not to interfere. But yeah, I think I moved too quickly for some people with talking about sanctuary, even talking about supporting congregations that were providing sanctuary. That was problematic. So I like your point, Andrew, about just taking 2 steps down the road. The other thing I'd say, at least as far as our Lutheran church is going, the Twin Cities in Minnesota are, very heavily Lutheran populated. And I know that our churches there have been hospitality sites for protesters. They've been out in the streets with the protesters, since George Floyd's killing. and they continue to be out there now. So I think that's one of the things that the church needs to do more of is get out there in the street and be with people as they are working for racial justice, social justice in general, et cetera.
Thank you so much. We're going to wrap up here. If anyone has any last remarks they would like to say, please go right ahead. We don't want to keep the students too long, but thank you all for joining us. First off, this has been such a great discussion. You basically just went with your own discussion. I didn't even have to ask the questions. So that is always the best type of conversation when it's natural. But please, if anyone has any last remarks, go right ahead.
That's amazing. And we really appreciate your time and sharing with us, because that's what we are trying to do, to listen and to work together, and especially being, believe me, in a very particular part of the world, right, with the certain values. And it's very hard and to persuade people that social justice is important, that we are come under the same God of gods, right? And that's what we're trying to teach people. And believe me, it took me years when I first went to CBST with the skeptical mind, because you cannot change, right? But you can. That's the most common ground. And I guess for students, all of you've said today, it's an inspirational. Who attended this panel will be more probably proactive. And for us, it's a kind of common ground to start that initiative in Slippery Rock. And I guess we're gonna reach all of you, not even once, twice, or